So hello and welcome to AML Gray Matters. Today is Wednesday, 16th of March, 2022. I'm your host, Kimberly Smith. I'm the co-founder of Silo Compliance System and a former compliance officer in MLRO. I want to welcome our live audience, especially our Silo Compliance System users. I recognize a lot of your names here, so welcome. Joining us today is Angela Mele of RiskPass in the Cayman Islands. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you very much, Kim. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you for being here. So Angela and I have agreed, we've known each other for a long time, and Angela and I have agreed that if the pandemic taught us anything, it taught us that anything could happen and disaster plans matter. So I want to remind our audience that this webinar is not legal advice. We will take some questions from the live audience at the end, and we encourage your questions. I make no promises that the webinar will only last an hour, because I've promised that in the past and we always went over a little bit. But Angela and I are pretty good about managing the clock and our conversation, and so we will move it forward and try to get you out of here at the top of the hour. Now, certificates will be auto-generated and sent to live attendees via email approximately 1 hour after the end of the broadcast, so keep an eye on your emails for that. And there is 2 handouts today. The first one's a useful checklist for preparing personally your home and your family for disasters. I encourage you to download that and take it home and get your family ready for any disaster event. Also, and there's another one too we just added, and that is a statement of guidance from CIMA, that's the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority. It is dated March 2007, so it's about 15 years old, but still it's a good statement of guidance if you're new to disaster planning, so please go ahead and download that as well, and that is also available on the CIMA website. Also, the recording will be sent out in a few days. We usually get the recording out on Friday, so for those of you who like those recordings, please again keep your eyes on your inbox on Friday. We're going to start off with a few polling questions. For our live audience, your responses do help us know who is listening in and why you are here, and that helps us manage our conversation. So please take a second to respond to these polls. The first one is I'm here because, so go ahead and just take some time to answer that, and then we will also launch the responses. Tom, you have any responses to that one yet?
Yeah, quite a few are coming through.
Okay.
Looks like two are getting the majority of the votes, but I will close it and share now.
Okay. Okay, so it looks like we have, you want to go ahead and just read off can you read off the responses? Not the responses, but kind of looks like most of you are responsible for drafting your BCP, and that's why you're here. And can't see the answers on one. Another one is just kind of saying that you're completely new to disaster planning. Okay, all right. So those seem to be our 2 major audience members. Second question. All right, you have experienced disaster that interrupted your workplace for more than 3 days. So give us a indication of what your experience is. So I think most of our audience today is probably in the Caribbean, so hurricanes would be one of those situations that you've maybe experienced. I'm seeing that about 40% are saying yes, they have experienced a natural disaster. 30% saying no, they have never. Thankfully, 0% are saying that they have not, or that they have experienced any kind of geopolitical disaster, such as martial law or conflict zones. So that's a good sign. Okay, fantastic. So good half of you have already experienced a natural disaster. All right, and the next question. For those that have experienced disruption, how prepared were you? Did you feel prepared? Okay, some good answers here. I'm showing about 20% are showing that they were very prepared. About 50% were saying that they were somewhat prepared. And 32% are saying not at all prepared. So that is a terrible situation when you aren't prepared at all.
They're just honest.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, it's one of those situations too. You think you're prepared, and then events happen that you realize, oh, I didn't think about that. So
Right.
you probably were, they probably were, a little bit okay, or better off than those who really weren't prepared at all. And I have had that personal experience as well, which I'll share later. Your current business continuity plan is, all right. So far, yeah, 30% do not cover pandemics. That's the response we're getting now. Because I'm sure many of us didn't think about that up until 2020. See, about 30% are saying it doesn't even exist yet, but hopefully by the end of the day, you'll at least get it started. All right, some good responses here. I've got 29% saying dusty and outdated, 48% say it does not cover pandemics, 10% does not name specific individuals in response roles, and 38% are saying it does not exist yet. So, okay, good on you, the 38% who are saying that. Again, hopefully by the end of the day, you'll have a start point for it. And our latest BCP, this is the last polling question. Our latest BCP is located in that BCP stands for Business Continuity Plan. Is located in, see, about 30% are saying it's available on your internet, or an e-file. About 20% are showing, oh, no, that number is going up. It says in HR or with the department managers. 35% are saying no idea. We don't have one yet. And 5% are saying others. All right, so it's we're going to be touching on some of those areas about where your BCP is located and how it's available. So fantastic. Thank you, Tom. Okay. So yeah, Tom Gardner, he's our account manager. He is working behind the scenes on these polls. So thank you very much for that, Tom. All right, I'm going to move on. This is where we begin. Is the first stage is identifying some of the different types of disruptions. So Angela, is there anything that you wanted to kind of mention on this slide? Any disruptions that you've personally experienced?
Gee, thanks. Yeah. Okay, to start, this topic is massive. So Kim and I are just going to just touch the tip of the iceberg on this. And hitting an iceberg is also a natural disaster of some sort as well.
Yeah.
And let's go back 16 years. Kim, you were not on the island for Ivan, but Ivan was pretty memorable for any of us who were, and even if you weren't. And it was to some extent for many of us very much a game changer. Those of us who are in the compliance or risk suddenly discovered that, oh, did you not know compliance at risk? This was your responsibility. And many of us in compliance view compliance as basically much more focused on CDD, making sure you're in line with the legs and regs. But this was, any natural disaster changes things very quickly for you and your company. The other thing I do want people to keep in mind is that there's theory and then there's reality. Okay. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they meet, but not that often. Okay. And there's also the professional and the personal when it comes to disasters. And disasters are limitless. So Kim has very kindly laid out 4 categories of disasters, and I tend to concur with her approach. But like I said, these are not limited lists at the moment that you're seeing on the screen. Of course, there's the natural environmental disaster, which includes tornadoes, earthquakes, hurricanes, fire, landscape, flood, electrical storms, and tsunamis. That's, like I said, you can get, wicked snowstorms, the earth is a moving cell and things happen very quickly, and we often don't get the advanced notice that we need. The one good thing about earthquakes is we actually do get the advanced notice in many cases. Right. So there's Mother Nature that we're dealing with. There's also the systems technical disasters that we have to deal with as well, which can be loss of data, server failure, ransomware, and virus. Now, Kim, a few weeks ago, or maybe a month ago, you did a session on ransomware as well, which was really, really interesting. This is a different category of disasters, but it can be very disastrous to your company if you experience it. Absolutely. Server failure is bad enough. I mean, everyone knows what it's like. Just being, without electricity for 15 minutes, at a time. Everyone wanders around looking dazed and confused, right? So you imagine days
Right.
and days of that, right? Third category that you have is supply system disaster. Utility failures such as severed gas or water lines, communication failures, electrical power outages, energy shortages, or fuel crisis. The one thing that maybe we could add in there is just supply chain. And I think many of us are going through, mild issues with supply chain. Not disasters, but issues, okay? We can't get what we could have purchased 3 years ago here on the island. I mean, and I try to explain it to my family overseas. Okay, we used to have 10 different types of mustards. Now we only get 2 or 3. Okay, that's not a disaster.
Yeah, exactly.
But that sort of is like a canary in a coal mine, right? If that's the case, what's it going to be a little bit later on when it comes to supply chain issues? Admittedly, I think considering COVID was a global pandemic, I think in general, many of us can say that the supply chains were not bad. We were okay in this part of the world. Other parts of the world, it wasn't as positive, right?
Right.
Then the fourth category is human, political, organized, or deliberate. Okay, well, terrorism. I know that since September 11th, 2001, we have all had, the concern of terrorist attacks in the back of our minds, in particular in large urban centers and in certain countries, right? Theft, of course, is always an issue, and disgruntled worker or employer, or pardon me, employee. And when I speak with people in the industry, everyone seems to agree your greatest risk is internal. It's not so much external. The chances of you being hacked by someone overseas is high, but your greatest risk is actually being hacked or something detrimental happening with one of your coworkers or former coworkers or employees.
Right. Right.
That's now you could do an entire session on that, Kim. So
Exactly. Yeah. No,
yeah,
I think I'll hold that on that one.
yeah.
But
Of course, as Kim and I discovered very quickly, one slide was not enough. Okay.
Yeah.
So back to here, there's also the issue, of course, under human political of arson, okay, and vandalism. So unfortunately, for those of you who are in HR and are trying to constantly build, group working exercises, in reality, your compliance officer is often the person who says, don't trust your current employees. Okay, completely, 100%. That's why you need checks and balances in place. All right.
Yeah.
So those
absolutely.
are the 4 categories. Now, you may come in, in the next little while and say, I read something else that categorized the disasters in a different manner, and that's fine. Like I said, we're just touching the tip of the iceberg at the moment. So
Absolutely.
these are fun. Volcanic ash, and
Yeah.
that you and I were discussing the other day, Kim, Barbados was impacted by the St. Vincent eruption, and who would have thought of that? I guess if you're in Barbados, you would think of that, but those of us who don't live there probably never crossed our minds, right?
Right. Right.
So
That's probably one of the situations where I learned after a flood that I experienced is that one of the first stages you're going to do when you're doing your business continuity plan is what's called a business impact assessment, which we'll discuss. But the first thing is that situational awareness, that awareness of what is near you in your office, such as volcanoes and stuff. But then you have to think wider as well. That volcano.
Kim, can you hear me? Kim, I've lost you.
Hi, Angela. It's Tom. I've lost her too. Let me give her a call.
I will, if it's okay, I'll continue on and see if you can get Kim back on.
Awesome, will do.
Sorry?
Awesome, yeah, I will do.
Okay, and this is a good, this isn't really a disaster, but things happen, right? IT issues happen. Okay, Kim was discussing the volcanic ash in Barbados and how that impacted, how that was impacted Barbados from, an island off their coast.
Sorry, guys, can you hear me?
Yes, we can now. Yes.
Okay, sorry.
All right.
some reason my speakers, my headset decided to go out, which is again not a disaster.
No, that's what you're saying.
Just a minor, yeah, exactly. Somebody wrote, they said, Kim, you fell into the volcano. Yeah. So yeah, I have. So yeah, so going back to what I was saying, you don't just think about your immediate area as far as potentially what can happen, but what can happen. I mean, and look at what happened in Iceland when that volcano and then the skies, kind of all the planes had to stop because of the Icelandic volcano that impacted Europe. I don't know if you guys remember that as well.
Yeah, definitely. That went on for quite an extended period of time, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. It did. And whenever I was living in a town, we had a train that was going through, and that particular train, our Office of Emergency Management in that particular town, they are very aware that that train was carrying often chemicals that if there was a derailment could require the evacuation of the entire city of 80,000 people.
Yeah.
So
And those of you
things like that.
Those of you who haven't lived in North America or in Europe, a lot of people and materials are moved via rail. It's an effective way to do things. However, it doesn't, there are accidents and things do, and trains derail, right?
Right, absolutely. And kind of going back to the key employee, it's not even just that will they do something maliciously, but what happens if a key employee is incapacitated for any reason, for any length of time? This might be, IT people, senior management, people who have to traditionally sign off, on certain files, maybe, your higher risk files, for instance. What happens if they are unavailable suddenly? So that's something else you also want to think about, as well as what, and I mentioned here, the building issues. What if suddenly black mold is found, or asbestos, or just even if your heat or AC goes out for long periods of time. And we were talking too about supply chains. Here in the States, we have, it's things like catalytic converters are getting harder for our cars, are getting harder and harder. So what if you're on an island and suddenly your AC goes out? How long is it going to take you to replace that AC unit so that your staff can work comfortably? So again, not necessarily a disaster, but it could disrupt business. It's something you need to think about too, I think, especially whenever you're just doing your budgets and maintenance of building issues. So things to work on. I'm going to move on to the next slide. Now, these are some photographs of situations that I have personally been in. So the top the top left is ice storms. I grew up in Arkansas, and I was raised by a military and farming family. So, and in Arkansas, we get tornadoes in the spring, and in the winter, we get ice storms. And kudos to my parents. They always had us plenty of food and fireplaces. So we never suffered, but I've heard stories from people, in my neighborhood that, they went hungry whenever they couldn't get to the grocery store after 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, and that goes down to the personal that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, these are all personally, I've personally endured these situations.
Yeah. And just as an aside, we had years ago, I was at the World Disaster Management Conference in Toronto, and one of the speakers, basically, he had been in September 11th. He was a medic, I believe, in September 11th in New York, and he said, don't ever think that your staff will show up to work if their family is at risk. They won't.
No, absolutely.
So that's something to keep in mind as well. And so that's why business continuity really does equate to staff continuity, and making sure that your staff are comfortable and safe and their families are comfortable and safe really is important.
Yeah, absolutely. The top right is the 1989 earthquake in San Francisco. That's when the Bay Bridge collapsed. This is a photograph of what was then known as the Embarcadero. I think they called it the Embarcadero Freeway, and that whole freeway collapsed, and they ended up knocking it all down. But this was right next to downtown San Francisco where I worked. The bottom left, gunman slays 8 in high-rise. There was a shooting in San Francisco. It was a gunman went into a law office in the 101 California Street building. I was in the building next to it, so I was not in that particular office. And I was by myself. I was a paralegal, and
got a phone call saying, lock the doors, there's a gunman, and they don't know where, it was hours. They did not know where he was until they found him and were able to give the all clear. So your sheltering in place situation there, which is terrifying whenever you think about it, because you don't know, can I go down? You can't leave. You don't go down stairways. You don't get into an elevator because you don't know who's around the corner. And then in 2011, there were the London riots. So I was in London at that time. And I guess what this really shows is don't be anywhere near me. Because I seem to attract.
I was saying the same thing. You and I are never going on vacation together.
Exactly. We'll never go on vacation together. However, it was 2013 when I was living in Longmont, Colorado, when a flash flood caught me off guard. Now, this picture that you're seeing here was taken about an hour before what is normally a very small creek. It rose so fast, and my house was located about a block away, and my daughter and I were made to evacuate. My husband was deployed with the military at the time, so I was on my own. And although I had plenty of disaster prep experience that you've seen before, a flash flood, that flash flood, that was a fast evacuation. I mean, it went from everything's fine, and it just simply was not in my playbook. And you can see here some little railings in the image. That was a bike path, and this was normally a little creek that you could maybe it got up to your knees, on a regular day, and that flooded in about I guess a few hours. It just came fast. And this image here, it's BVI after Hurricane Maria in 2017. Now, I was not there. I did manage to evacuate because I had been in there the day before. But I did hear some horror stories about those who went through it, and my heart just broke. And Angela, you did endure Ivan that hit Cayman in 2004, correct?
Wouldn't have missed it. Yeah.
Yeah, wouldn't have missed it. And there was a lot of learning that went on
Yes.
after that.
A lot, which is, which made us go back and look at our business continuity plan and disaster management plan and what went right and what went wrong. And that's one of the really important things that, for those of you who are responsible for BCP, testing, and we'll talk about this in a bit, testing and whether it be tabletop testing or reality testing is really, really important. So,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Okay.
Cayman looked very similar to this, I have to admit. So
yes.
We're going to be breaking this down into 4 parts this morning: business impact analysis, the risk assessment, risk management, and then risk monitoring and review. And I noticed that a number of you are currently writing or looking to revisit your business continuity plan. And there are a couple of things that well, one really important thing I do want to point out, which is you can write a plan, you can write the best plan in the world, but a lot of this actually falls to your local governments. All right, so to look at say an pandemic plan, and I actually was one of the few people who had one of these in December 2019, January 2020. Okay, beautiful little plan, great. I had all the reference material in place. I had plans whereby people would work from home, but it doesn't matter because I can't get, as Angela Mele or RiskPass AML compliance, I cannot get the vaccines. I rely on my government to do that, right? If the government locks us down and no one can leave their homes, I can only do so much. I can only ensure that my staff have access to their servers, the laptops are ready to go, they have the materials they need to work from home. So you are very much limited in this environment, but there's still a lot you can do. And a lot of it is almost like a mental preparation, all right?
Yeah.
So you sit and you do the preparation knowing full well that if the airport's closed after a hurricane or a natural disaster, that evacuation flight that you want to bring in, it's not going to show up because it can't land. That airport has to be opened by the proper authorities. However, all right, there are all these other things you can do, and that gives you, I don't want to say a false sense of security, but it gives you a sense of security to some extent that you are able to control at least a little bit of this issue. So let's try the next slide. We'll talk about business impact analysis.
Yeah, so we were just going to say, it's your BCP, those 4 stages or those 4 sections, is the business continuity plan itself. And of course, it needs to be approved by management, and it should include the plans for emergency responses, backup operations, and post-disaster recovery. And as you mentioned, it could be, okay, a Hurricane 5 category, Category 5 hurricane hits. In scenario 1, the airport's closed because it's been damaged. In scenario 2, the airports are not closed. So, that you could break it down even further. And of course, the purpose of the BCP is to minimize that operational disruption. And of course, also maintain reputational, your reputation and other consequences. And we were even talking as well about how after Ivan, a lot of firms lost their expat staff because the expat staff lost their homes. So there was no housing, so they had to leave. And so remember, you have to think about what could happen if you lose a lot of staff that are very, very important as well. And of course, the other purpose is to keep your staff safe and your clients informed, so they can know when business is going to be back up and running soon. See if sorry, my slides have, there we go. So again, we go back to the first section of the BCP, which is the business impact analysis. So again, that's where we kind of talk about, do you have a volcano? Are you susceptible to hurricanes? Can you be floods? Where do you think about what could impact your business? And of course, then those and you're looking at the critical operations as well. So so make sure you're thinking about what has to be operating for business to continue, and how long is it going to take to go down. And Angela, I added this slide last night because I saw something similar. And this is, it's got just a little spreadsheet where you look at your different business critical operations and you write them all down. What are you absolutely dependent on? So for instance, the HR database, maybe it can be down for 3 or 4 days. Maybe that's not going to impact your critical business operations. If that HR database went down, how long would it take for that recovery? And then what's the impact on your customers? What's the impact on your finances? These are all just numbers I threw up there. But this is something what you might want to start with when you're looking at your business impact analysis. And Angela, have you done something like this with your clients?
Not exactly the same. We've looked at it. We haven't put it out in a nice little grid like this, but this is something that we look at when we do our tabletop testing. So yeah.
Okay.
And every company will not be the same, right? Because every business
absolutely no, everybody's different. Everybody's different.
So the one thing that I did when I started this process, and a long time ago, 16 years ago, is just brainstorm. Sit around with your staff and just brainstorm what's important to this part of the company versus that part of the company. Right. Where are you going to be? Like I said to you, to make sure that your staff are safe. And in the case of certain jurisdictions, some people will leave. Expat staff will leave. Local staff who have their homes and their families here during a hurricane will often stay because they want to make sure that their families are safe and their homes are protected. So
that's right. That's right. That then moves us, once you've done your business impact analysis of your critical business operations, you then start moving into your risk assessment stage. And you're looking at, okay, what's the probability of the event and what's the impact going to be? And again, you can break that down. Hurricanes, for instance, okay, Cat 1 to 3, all right, higher likelihood of happening, but the impact is maybe more lower because maybe you've built up your buildings and your infrastructure. Whereas a Category 4 or 5, maybe it's less probability of happening, but the impact is going to be much greater, as Cayman and BVI both saw. And again, what happens if another pandemic happens? What's the probability? What's the impact in your jurisdiction? A lot of jurisdictions did close their borders right away. So they, like I know Cayman, you had your borders closed and everybody was fine. Your maskless schools continued, but here in the States, it just kept coming.
Yeah, and of course,
so,
talking about
again, so think about how your government reacted in the past and what that might mean for you. So business could still operate in Cayman, thankfully.
Right. And one of the Just go back to that other slide. The one thing that Kim and I were discussing earlier in the week is the probability, and that's actually something that falls into the statement of guidance here in Cayman. They expect you to look at the probability of possible disasters, and to me, it's like how long is a piece of string? Okay, and I can pretty well guarantee to you, once again, if you know, in July 2019, if you'd said to anyone out there, so what do you think the chances of a pandemic are? They probably go, about 0. Right? January, February 2020, that statistic was very, very different.
Right.
So things change very quickly. And it's important. I know this sounds really silly, but it's important to keep on top of the news. Right?
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. And not just our local news, but what's going on in others. I heard about the pandemic in February and mid-February, maybe even it was end of January, because my husband's, he kind of monitors all these, I don't know what they're called, Reddit threads and things like that. And it was mid-February where we started buying up some masks and more bleach and stuff. And I was, going around the office and, bleaching doorknobs and light switches, trying to make sure no one was, passing around a, flu or anything. But yeah, so it was, and of course, and it was mid-March when everything just kind of shut down. But again, when you're looking at that impact, and again, I just wanted to show this slide one more time. These things, there's stuff outside of your jurisdiction that can impact you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I even put here this financial disasters. Are these disasters for your business? What happens with the banking system? If we've got a lot of stuff going on with Russia and stuff like that, and there's attacks on, there could be lots of attacks on financial systems. What happens if your bank gets attacked and is shut down for 3 days? While they deal with the ransomware. So it's not just, again, things that impact you, but things that could impact your key vendors and suppliers as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Now we move into the third stage, which is that risk management. And of course, we talk about acceptance, avoidance, reduction, or transfer. So most of our compliance people are risk managers. They understand, okay, do we accept this risk? Can we avoid it? What can we do to avoid it completely? What can we do to reduce the chances, mitigate that risk, and can we transfer it? Can't transfer a hurricane.
So, and those of you who are looking to sit and write a business continuity plan, what I suggest is just Google around, see if you can even find the table of contents for a business continuity plan. Talk to your staff, and brainstorm. This was the first business continuity plan I wrote. I have to admit, took longer than I ever expected to, because it's like going down a road and it doesn't fork a couple of times, it forks 10 times.
Yeah.
There's so many ways you can go about it. So there's a lot of material out there on the internet. It's really, really good material. And also when I was writing my pandemic epidemic plan many years ago, there were fantastic resources out there, but it's almost like just an embarrassment of riches. Start with the CDC in Atlanta. The World Health Organization has some amazing material, and a lot of that's theoretical. But one of the best resources I found was the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters Association, which actually during the avian flu crisis, which didn't hit us in the Caribbean or North America, it actually had like really practical things such as, here's how you wash your hands, here's how you social distance, here's how you cross-train your people in case you end up with 22% of your staff out at any given time.
Right.
And so there's a practical element, like I said, and there's a theoretical element. So be prepared if you're writing this manual to do a lot of reading and research.
Right. And then the fourth stage is that risk monitoring and review. And that includes the periodic testing, and we'll show how you should do some testing, as well as an independent audit and review. Now, Angela, can you explain a little bit more about the independent audit and review? I mean, does that mean bringing a third party in?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because I have not, and I haven't approved the statement of guidance for a little while. I don't remember it saying that we have to have an independent auditor review here in Cayman.
Okay.
But there are a few, I mean, you can have an internal audit or review. which can tie in with the testing, and you should also have training. Okay, you can bring in a third party. The issue with the third party in this situation, although they're probably coming in with incredible expertise, often they don't necessarily know your business. So you want to make sure that they're fully aware when they walk in the door or do this remotely, what your business is, what you do, what your risks are, okay? Because if you're going to go through this process, you want to make sure you've got some really great takeaways, all right? Now, the other thing is you may be able to do this in like small tranches almost. So your business continuity disaster management, you might only focus on your IT and servers on one of them, okay?
Right.
And then another time you may look at your actual building. And one of the things I would suggest as well is befriend some architects and engineers. And you're probably thinking, why? Well, because when I first got here, I think the first week I was here, I met an engineer, civil engineer, who said to me, oh, did you not know that there's a fault line off the south shore of the Cayman Islands, of Grand Cayman? I went, oh, no. He said, yeah, we could experience tremors and earthquake. Now, for me, I always thought Caribbean hurricanes, but we have this other issue, right? This other impending threat. And actually, I think it was in Jan 2020, we did experience the fault line shifting. So once again, you know those really dull, boring government reports that you get, you can probably access. You may want to actually just skim those, even if you skim the titles only. Right? Because there are incredible resources out there, once again, online that are open to the public in certain jurisdictions, right? So, and then it goes back to your building, right? And those of us who have been through natural disasters, you have to stop, like Kim, you were in San Francisco. The buildings are built to withstand an earthquake, right? They're designed that way. Now, where you come from in Colorado, maybe not. Right. So these are the types of things you need to be made aware of. So another really good example is right now I rent a space in a building with a generator and I'm on the second floor. And there's a reason for that. And we're on West Bay Road because once again, if we're hit by a hurricane or disaster and the electricity goes out, the areas that are the most populated will more than likely be the areas that will get electricity back the fastest. So for business continuity, that's something that I need to take into consideration. Plus the fact that, you know, we have a generator that will kick in. All right, I'll be able to work, charge things, and charge my laptop. Okay, and also, if your staff end up in their homes and their homes are damaged, their next stop is probably family or the office. So it's very possible you will have people actually staying with you. If you've got a generator, it makes everyone's life a little bit easier. Oh, the other thing we have is a shower.
That's always a plus.
Always a plus, yes. And after Ivan, a lot of buildings in Cayman, a lot of office buildings were built with showers on the second and third floor. A lot. Yeah. So yeah, an independent audit is important. So, but look, think about not just your business, but the actual structure of your building, and think about your IT. And you may want audits from. You may want audits where you're not expecting it. Your IT people, you may want to have like a structural engineer come in if you're a big company and look at your building, right? Case in point, that building in South Beach that collapsed about a year ago.
Right, yes, I remember that.
Right, so yeah, so there you go. Is that okay, Kim?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and of course, the other part of reviewing your BCP is you're going to want to have what I call trigger events, such as when you're changing any kind of IT system, such maybe you go from on-prem servers to move up to the cloud. Those are usually for disaster recovery and backup reasons. Any changes to key personnel, and as well as any new threats. And of course, I'm going to mention any kind of geopolitical threats that are occurring in today's world. So for any of those who are in Eastern Europe or Europe, they might want to start thinking about, what happens if, and any new solutions that are available, because technology does, and there are other things that maybe your government's getting more involved as well in providing some new solutions, new shelters and things like that.
Yeah.
So, and the business continuity plan should set up required governance structures. It should have established response team, establish the authority, who can make the decisions on the ground pre-event, during the event, post-event as well. And again, it must be approved by your senior management. So you don't just write it and hand it out. Your senior management needs to review this and sign off. You're going to look at some recovery time objectives, whether it's hours and days, alternative work sites. And you also, for those in the Caribbean, you're going to need to think about data residency and tax implications, because you can't just move your staff up to the US and have them keep working. So you need to think about that as well. As we have in our business here, we have 3 alternative work sites. That includes their homes, if homes aren't available, where we can evacuate to, and alternative work sites as well. So and then of course you think too about your press releases and statements, anything that's sent out to the public. Can you pre-draft some statements and get those approved, and identify who has the authority to speak. Make sure you train your staff to know that maybe they should not be speaking to press or posting on social media, because again, going back to business continuity, you don't want to be stressing your clients thinking that you guys have just been wiped out. And people do. We get anxious. We want to post things on our social media, but that could reputationally damage your business. So do think about that as well.
Right, and that's really important. Many firms have policies whereby should there be a disaster, the staff are instructed not to speak to the press.
Right.
So, and everything has to be, run through the marketing department.
Right.
So,
right.
Also, the issue you mentioned earlier about working overseas, you just can't rock up to a country and plug your laptop in and start working if you're not a citizen or you don't have residency. And people don't always think of that, and sometimes companies don't think of that either.
Yeah.
So that
Even
might be
something
you may want to sit down once again with your staff and say, okay, we are a staff of 25. How many of you plan to stay? How many of you don't? If you don't stay, where can you work overseas? Where can we set up? How do we even fly there? Or
right.
get there, right? So these are the types of things you have to take a look at. And consider, and if you need, are you going to use, are you going to have to rent an office space? I mean, if you've got a large enough staff. So these are things that, really you need to sit down with your staff or your directors and your management and make decisions. And I can promise you that old saying, no plan survives its enemy. That plan will change, but at least, like you said, even if it's a false sense of security, at least you have thought about these issues.
Right. That's right. The disaster management plan. Now, these are subsets of the BCP, kind of like annexes, of the actual larger document, which is the business continuity plan. And you may have several DMPs, several disaster management plans, one for a hurricane, one for an earthquake, one for a server down. So just remember that these are short-term plans of actions, almost like a checklist, who does what, identifying the response team for each disaster. So that's, again, just remember that you're going to have to think through each particular disaster. We've got another polling question.
Sorry, quickly, Kim, just as an aside, the difference between business continuity plan and disaster management plan is basically your business continuity plan is your overall plan, okay? Mm-hmm. It deals with the continuity of operations, whereas your disaster management plan deals with the restoration of business operations, right? So if you're down completely, that's when your disaster management plan kicks in.
Right, okay. So we have another polling question. And that is, if you use a swipe card to gain entry to your building, where are your physical keys? Should swipe pads not work suddenly? And I actually did have the situation where we did have a swipe key to get in and get to work one morning and doesn't work. No disaster, no tornado, no ice, nothing like that. As far as I know, electricity is still up and running. I just suddenly, my keypad just wouldn't work. So even though that was really an inconvenience at the end of the day, I learned no one knew where the key was. Or worse, the one person who did know where the key was, we couldn't reach her. So go ahead and answer your question. Answer if you know where the keys are. All right. So like me, go ahead and close that off, Tom. 23% of you are saying you have no idea. 8% are saying it's in the office, that's exactly where our key was. It was in the office.
Can't get in the office, that doesn't work.
Exactly, I couldn't get into the office. 23% say it's held by a specific person, and they'll know, so you want to make sure that they don't have it in the office. 46% say there's another set at my house. Okay, so 46% of you say you can go back to your house and you can get it. So that's great. But yeah, no, that was a learning experience for me as well, as far as like, oh, wait a second, we got to think about this because we're so reliant on these keypads.
Really important thing, and because as I was telling you, Kim, I was running a business continuity plan for a client, and I said, okay, how do you get into the office if the keypad's not working? Well, I've got a key, great. And how do you, and that's at my house. Like, terrific. And how do you get into your house? I keypad in. So basically, if the entire island loses electricity, you're standing outside, right? So you have to have a key somewhere, and it's old fashioned. I know it's totally old school, but that is what you need if we don't have electricity. And it happens, right?
Yeah, it does happen. So little things like that can be what, you know, you thought about, you know, evacuation and stuff like that, but all of a sudden you forget, what about the key? And what happens if the person who evacuates is the person who has the key?
Yes.
So
it's usually on them, on their keychain.
Exactly. They're like, oh, I've got it with me in Miami. Yeah. So the next slide, when you do want to prepare your staff, you want to let them know the plans, when evacuations are required and for who. And remember, it's not just your staff. It could be your staff's family that you may have, that a business might want to evacuate. Larger firms, I know, sometimes do arrange evacuation planes for staff and their families. You might say, okay, those with kids, you know, or those who are expats can, you know, and I'm kind of thinking in terms of pre-hurricane or pre-disaster, if you were given that ability. But then even after event, again, who evacuates, what they can take, where they're going to go, have those travel documents and travel visas, you know, ready, copies of them, and not just for your staff, but for their dependents as well. Have those lists of contact numbers where they may go in other jurisdictions, their families, both on and off island.
Very important.
Yeah, these are very important. So for instance, you know, if I know how to contact one of my staff members' mother and brother, both in different jurisdictions. So because I have their numbers, you know, ready. So if I don't hear from them, maybe I can, you know, reach out to a family member. Have you heard, you know, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Know about preferred shelter locations too. Are they going to come to the office to shelter if your office is a shelter, or are they going to go somewhere else? So you're not then afterwards trying to track down where are they, you know.
And the other thing with the valid passports and travel documents, that's twofold. The first is that in a disaster, it's very possible a travel documentation such as passports and visas are lost or destroyed. All right.
Yes.
So at least if you know that there is a copy somewhere, okay, that you can access, not just for yourself, but for your family members, that's really important. And then also, in the event that an evacuation flight may be needed, that information will be required because that's private. So I hope I've got this correct. So if you fly into the US from the Caribbean privately, you need your own visa if you're not an American or Canadian citizen. You cannot rely on a visa waiver. Now, that was a few years ago and it may have changed, but once again, it's something to look into because you don't want to find out that everyone is good to go and get on the flight. And then customs in Miami say, I'm sorry, but of the 20 people flying in, 15 of them are on visa waivers, they don't have proper visas, we cannot let them in on a private flight. So those are the types of things that you don't think of until you're in that situation. But if you can
Right.
find that out first, it helps. The other thing to do, contact the local consulates in your jurisdiction to see how much assistance those local consulates will give to their citizens.
Okay, that's a good
That's
idea.
a really important thing. Now in Cayman, we don't have embassies, we have consulates. So I've gone to them. I did call the Canadian consulate many years ago, and quite obviously the individual I was speaking with had not been through a hurricane, because the answer I got was call Ottawa. And I said, but there were no lines off the island after Ivan. She said, oh, there were no, you couldn't call Ottawa? And no, I couldn't call Ottawa. I couldn't call anyone, right? So
Yeah.
do this before the fact, not after.
Not exactly. So some additional tips for preparing your staff is, again, establishing that clear evacuation policy: who, what they can take. Can they take a backpack? Can they take, a large suitcase? When the evacuation will happen, such as will it happen pre-event or post-event? Where it will happen? Do they go to a private airport? Do they go to a to the main airport? Where they will be evacuated to and how. So also, again, keep copies of that the business continuity plan. Make sure it's accessible offline. Print it out and offline, several copies. Not online, not on your intranet, because that is, I know that's where it's stored, but you need to make sure you have copies printed. Again, we talk about the keys, who's got the keys, any changed reporting lines. Your managing director or the owner of the company might not have any idea what to do with when the server's down. So who's in charge during that particular situation? Who will you go to guidance for each, or advice or information? Think too about the flow of communication. So if you don't have internets and telephones are down, or it's hard to reach everybody, whiteboards, and markers. Where is it going to be located? Is it going to be located in the lobby of your office? Who's going to update it? How often is it going to be updated?
Right. And the lobby of the office is a really good idea, Kim. And also, if possible, but it's not always necessarily possible, a lot of communication can now be done through WhatsApp, but that will depend on whether the systems are up, but also whether people are able to charge their phones.
Absolutely.
So I tell all my staff, get a charger for your car. You can charge it off the battery.
Yes.
Or everyone needs a charger for their phone that they can plug into the car.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, of course, another alternative method is, again, maybe a WhatsApp group. You instruct them, hey, we're going to set up a WhatsApp group, everybody join, or even use of social media, a private Facebook group for your company. That could be another form of communication and getting information out.
Right.
And of course, the post-disaster considerations, you've got to think about the supply chain. What happens if there's damage to ports and airports? What's happening with the existing supply chain challenges that we're currently having? I mean, I'll never forget thinking last year in the US, we had a lumber shortage because there were so many houses being built. And I remember thinking, if the island, if like Cayman, for instance, got hit by a major hurricane, the rebuilding efforts were going to be very, very difficult, because if we can't get lumber, how are we going to send lumber to Cayman?
Right.
For rebuilding? So, and think too about fuel shortages. What's going to happen? Do you have some cans in? Who's got some fuel? In a can to fuel up that generator? Because you don't know if even the gas stations are going to be open or not. Also, the insurance claims. Cash on hand, your financial ability to obtain supplies, food, and get people and staff out. So those are some of the post-disaster consideration. Talking about cash on hand too, I know some people who, they pull out, $1,000 or so, but they always have it in large bills and $100 bills. Not a good idea. You want 5s, 10s, and 20s, because you think about who you're buying from. They might not have the ability to give you change. So make sure you've got those small bills in cash. And if you're in a country where you might have dual currencies, like in Cayman, you've got the Cayman dollar as well as the US dollar in use there. So you might have a little bit of do both. You also want to think about your post-disaster plan, such as when will staff be required to return to the office? and what minimal conditions are required to return I mean, at the end of the day, the BCP, it's always about business continuity, getting your business back up and running. Your clients depend on you.
Yeah.
The families depend on you. Of course, and those families are who rebuild their communities. So you've got entire communities and schools that are depending on you to get business back up and going. Think about cleanup, and whether or not staff and their families are living at your office. What kind of food and supplies and fresh water and how things are showered and laundry, all that stuff can make life a little bit more bearable. If
the practical. And the other thing is, talk to your property manager or your landlord and check your lease.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, that might be something you want to take a look at, and see if there are anything in the lease that you maybe haven't taken into consideration.
Yeah.
Or be made aware of.
All right. We're showing about 5 more minutes left, and of course, then we're going to take and then there's the testing of the BCP. It's the final thing, and I like this. I like the tabletop testing. I can imagine, sitting together with the team, those are responsible, and just reading through. Okay, almost like reading through a play. What happens next by next by next? What assumptions are being made? What have we left out? That's a good way to test. I could definitely see this. As well as the simulation, both the parallel and the full interruption, to really test, especially your technologies. And it wasn't just having a checklist for your management team. Anything you wanted to add there?
I think that the one thing I would say that if you are going to be doing the testing, you might want to roll in the training at the same point in time, in particular if you're doing a tabletop test. That's usually the most common. All right. Rarely do you get a company that really wants to do the full interruption. Let's turn off all the electricity and send everyone home and see what happens. But the other point I wanted to bring out, which Kim, you and I have discussed in the past, is the pandemic was a really interesting situation because it was the really small firms that seemed to do well.
Yes.
A small firm with 3, 5, 7 staff members, they probably all have laptops. They were accustomed to working at home in many cases. They went home and just continued to work. So sometimes being big isn't always necessarily operative in every situation. And then, the other thing I did want to point out is keep in mind that during a natural disaster, a fire, a flood, earthquake, a hurricane, you lose your infrastructure. That's what's really at risk, but usually people survive. All right?
Right.
Pandemic, epidemic, you have the opposite. Your infrastructure is intact, but you lose your people.
Right.
So look at it from both points of view. And as Kim, as you and I have discussed with, the worst case scenario right now is what's going on in the Ukraine. And, those people are losing their infrastructure and they're losing people.
Right.
And Poland, of course, has had the knock-on effect because they've taken in, 1.5 million refugees, right? So you can imagine all hands on deck in Poland at the moment. They are trying to run the country, but at the same time dealing with huge numbers of refugees, and it's increasing every day. So although those of us in the Caribbean hopefully will never have to go through that experience, and that is the worst case scenario, it's just something to keep in mind, right? It can happen so quickly, and it can happen to any of us.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay, we are in Q&A time now. So if you have any questions, please feel free to post them, and we'll have Tom I'm not seeing any questions yet, but
Maybe we just scared everyone, Kim.
I think we have. And you know what? And kind of touching on that, you can go down a rabbit hole and you can find your anxiety levels increasing exponentially whenever you start thinking and you think, I'm not prepared. So yeah, just be aware that that's normal.
No one's completely prepared.
Yeah, no one's going to be completely prepared. And but yeah, as long as you can think of some scenarios and get yourself a little bit there. And again, my personal experience was mitigating after the floods was that the anxiety and the boredom, especially for my then teenage daughter.
Yeah.
We were, when we did get back to our house, we still had a lot of, we had no electricity and no running water. Again, we were prepared for that because I always have my little, I call my do not panic closet, which just has the water and the foods and the long shelf foods. But I was not prepared for the boredom. The 3-4 days where we had nothing to do other than read books, and you can only read books for so long. And one of my, so now we have a games closet. So it's just things like yo-yos and knitting kits and puzzles, a harmonica, paint by number kit, just simple games like that.
Are you good? At the end of the session, will you play us a song on your harmonica?
No, I didn't say I'm any good.
Cards, right? Cards.
Yeah, cards.
Exactly. And it's not like you can even clean. There's no running water. It's just
yeah,
it's
exactly.
like being at the cottage on a really, really bad day when you lose your electricity.
Yeah,
Right.
you really want to have things, anything that can involve movement. Like I said, I like jacks, like the little game of jacks that people used to play in the 40s. Anything that has movement or music can help relieve stress. You also want to think about medicines, your diabetics, anyone that relies on heart meds or other meds, you've got to get stocked up because you might be without. I'm on a medication now that I have to take daily, and a 90-day supply is now my minimum. And I'm even sometimes concerned, is that enough? But remember to, panic will set in. Even the best laid out plans, are going to have some problems.
Mm-hmm.
You can't plan for every single event. And but again, those checklists, the test of these BCPs, they're gonna help. They're gonna help you from being frozen in that complete fear. So, and remember to have your staff get themselves prepared at their homes and get their families prepared too. So I've got
as well helps. So I'll think of certain disasters, and Kim will come up and say, "Oh no, what about this as well?" And I'm like, "Oh, I never thought of that. I never thought of that approach. I never thought of that problem solve, that issue to problem solve." So that is one thing. And then just as an aside as well, I used to work for a company where there were 5 of us on the business continuity management team. And I found myself one August with being the only person on the ground. Everyone was on vacation other than me. And I called the other individual who's heading up the team with me, and he was on the golf course in somewhere in Eastern Canada, laughing, saying, "Ha ha, that's too bad. It's all fallen to you, hasn't it, Angela?" So after that, what I said is, fine, we're going to have our 5-man team, and then everyone's going to have a deputy. So, and guess what? You're not all leaving the island at the same time, not all 9 of you, right? So consider that as well, because if it's just left down to you, you're going to be the person running around doing all the work, and definitely being stressed out. And the other thing I can tell you, this is very interesting, is I think it comes down to sort of human nature, is during a time of real stress and disaster, sometimes the person you least expect it are the one who bucks up and it's the most help. I've been really surprised in the past. So don't negate anyone, because they might be the person who actually has your back. So
yeah, absolutely. We do have a question that came in. I've got somebody, he's asking, is there a template that you would recommend for a BCP or disaster recovery plan?
Oh gosh, I used to know that. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I would go to just Google around, see what you can find. And like I said, the templates I did find and the checklists I did find for like the pandemic epidemic, I got from the Canadian manufacturers. Yeah, I've got it somewhere. The Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters Association. They had some great templates, but there's everything online. Like everything's out there. You might want to check the CDC in Atlanta, or the World Health Organization as well. Those are some really great. There's some really terrific information out there, but it takes a long time to go through it and troll through to find what you really need. So be prepared. This manual is going to take you probably longer than you anticipate.
Yeah, it's not a day's exercise. And you remember too, you've got to talk to other department heads.
Right. And the other thing
that one person can write.
If you know anyone else who's in the industry who's doing something similar, sit down and have a cup of coffee with them and brainstorm.
Absolutely. It's a great idea.
That helps as well.
We're over the hour now, so we got one more polling question to offer, and then we also announcing our next webinar coming up. So Tom, if you want to go ahead and launch the next polling, and this is just kind of let us know, how do we do? Did we help you today in any way with how you can improve your current or non-existent business continuity plan? So yeah, so looks like we've got some good response. At least no one's saying, no, I'm still lost. We've accomplished a goal today, Angela.
Good. I'm glad to
So
hear
great,
that.
thank you very much. We're showing 50% are saying yes, especially the business impact analysis.
Right.
30% saying yes, especially the risk assessment. 30% saying how to test the BCP. And I have to say, doing the research, how the testing part is what I learned as well, doing the research part.
Yes,
All right.
definitely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Finally, our next webinar is going to cover sanctions, and that's in 2 weeks' time on 30th of March. Yeah, there we go. I'll let share that screen there. A lot of you have met Ulrich de la Paz. He's our next guest, and he's spoken at CRCA and ACAMS conferences, and he's been on the boards and helped organize those events and presented. And Ulrich is a sanctions manager at a leading bank in Curacao, so I'm hoping he will have some great insights for us, because I know so many of us are struggling right now with managing all the influx of sanctions. The registration link will be sent out with the recording of today's broadcast in a couple of days, so please keep an eye on that. Keep an eye out for in your inbox. Thank you again, Angela, for spending some time with us, and to all of our listeners, thank you. I know your time is very valuable, and we appreciate all that you do. I don't think compliance officers, this profession, is getting enough thanks for everything that you do. And again, my name is Kimberly Smith. Angela, any last words from you?
Just a big thank you, Kim. And as always, it's fun to work with you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Always nice to have
Thank you for all
you.
the listeners out there. We really appreciate your time.
Yes, we do. So again, this is AML Gray Matters presented by Silo Compliance and Angela Mele from RiskPass in the Cayman Islands, and we're signing off until next time. Thank you very much.
Everyone.
Bye.
Bye.